Hey everybody, it's Austin Buddy coming to you from my Electric Buddyland studios in beautiful Austin, Texas. It's July 3rd, the day before July 4th, and today I'm releasing the FM3 version of my newest TonePack, the Live Gold TonePack, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to do a little video tutorial on that because my fingers are so tired from everything else I don't think I can write a 40-page manual. I hope everybody's doing well in this crazy time of pandemic, and I think you're going to love these sounds if you've got an FM3. There will be an AXFX3 version of these exact same sounds. And I'm going to have to spend some time going through that because I'm not going to release it unless it's killer, but I guarantee the FM3 versions are killer. In releasing this, when you buy it, you get banks 1 and 2 today, but you're also going to get a bank 3 in a couple of weeks between July and August of all the metal amps and some other miscellaneous presets. That's in the works. I've been able to work a little bit with Mark Holcomb of Periphery on a couple of presets, which has been awesome. He's such a great guy and a great player. But we're going to have that ready, and that'll be part of what you buy. You just will get it later. It'll appear in your downloads folder. The other thing I want you to know is that, and these were done on firmware 1.05 for the FM3, you're also going to get access to both an AXFX3 and an FM3 version. No matter which one you buy, you're ultimately going to get both in your downloads. I think that's only fair. They're the same presets. Some of you have both units, and they're also going to be on sale for the summer. I know times are tough, particularly for musicians, so they're not going to be the usual $99 price. Existing customers, you can get it for $79. Anybody who wants to buy it between now and August 31st. So I hope that helps a lot. And again, you're going to get literally over 1,200 sounds, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of that in a minute. I'm going to go through the presets, how they're laid out. This is the best TonePack I've ever done. It has the most tonal variability inside of it. You can still customize things the way you want. And these are a little different than my other TonePacks, and I should talk about that real quick. This is inspired by the Dream Regs for the X8 and the Mark II and XL Plus. If you've got that, you sort of know a little bit. That'll help you as you start this. But it's also a little bit of the Naked Amps work that I did. It's kind of a hybrid between the two. So let me tell you the difference real quick. The Naked Amps are much more of sounds that I mixed basically here in stereo, like I'm in a studio trying to set up sounds for recording. So sometimes they don't have as much bottom end, or maybe a little more sort of mids in certain places, or high end, because I want those to sit in a mix a little better. And again, those are well received, and you get a lot more sounds in the Naked Amps from different amps. I'm able to do 8 different sounds for an amp. The Live Gold TonePack was dialed in a little differently. You can't see it, I'll put a picture up. About 10-12 feet away from me is one mono Atomic Neo CLR, turned up so where the loudness meter in a room on a phone, if you had a good loudness meter, would be over 92 dB. So it's at least a gig volume. It defeats any Fletcher Munson EQ perception issues. So they're dialed in for you to use them. And what I'm trying to do when I'm dialing these things in is I'm trying to get a live in the amp room sound. So there's a lot more bottom end to a lot of these presets, but I've also added a bass cut switch because everybody's FR is a little different. And we'll get into all that. There's also a great boost switch that really wakes up a lot of the amps. It's amazing what it does to some of the Marshalls. It makes them fat and juicy, and they're hard to stop playing once you start. So I wanted you to kind of know that that's the philosophy behind Live Gold. It really is. You can still use them for recording. You may have to trim a little bit of the bottom off at in your recording system just to have them sit in a mix better. They still sound great. So they're still functional for that. But for FM3 people, if you're doing gigs and things like that, these are going to be all you need. And I basically do pretty much every amp channel. I don't do any bass amps in here. I have a bass TonePack that's going to come out that'll do that stuff. And I'll walk through some of this as we go through, and I'll put the FM3 edit on the screen. But I try and give you in each preset 4 sounds for the amp that are basic, but I also have a single coil version of those, the little boost in some scenes as well. And there's some effects sprinkled through, and there's occasionally great artists, you'll hear a Brian May thing, for example, or a Page thing, or something like that. I've sprinkled Eddie Van Halen. I've sprinkled little Easter eggs throughout it for you to find in terms of effects and stuff. There's a lot of thought and design that went into how these things are set up to give you a lot of options as a player, whether you use humbuckers, whether you use single coils, just like in the Dream Rigs, Live Gold. You know, you don't have to just stick with one amp. You can decide that you like the clean from a Fender, and you like the dirty from a Vox, and you like the crunch from a Marshall, and the lead from a Dietzel, and you'll be able to then assemble your own presets. You know, you learn how to copy the amp blocks into it and assemble your very own version of this. You could do a gig with 1 or 2 presets. In fact, it's important for you to watch this if you want to get the most out of these presets. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for supporting Austin Buddy. I love doing this. I love making sounds that inspire people. I literally will do this and only save the sounds when I'm like, yeah, that inspires me. So I'm not going to go through how to use your download the banks and all that stuff. Go to the Axe3 edit tutorials. They walk you through all that stuff. The same sort of thing applies for the FM3. There are some things you'll need to set up though. All right, guys, we're back, and I've got 2 cameras on my FM3, and I apologize for the bad quality. One's an iPhone camera, one's a webcam, but I wanted you to be able to see the front panel as we do a few things to set up. So first of all, I've talked about some of this in the manual or whatever. You've got an out 1 and an out 2 control up here. You're going to want to set your out 1 somewhere between noon and 3 o'clock probably, depending on whether you're using the USB or the XLRs or the SPDIF. I personally dime mine. I put it all the way up, but I never use the USB, and I know that the SPDIF comes out of here 1.5 dB hotter, so that might overload a system. So 3 o'clock is probably about correct. But for some of you, depending on what your FRs are going to be, you may need to roll this back as far as 12, but you should not have to go under 12. The idea again is to optimize this signal, leaving the back, that it's going out at about minus 12 dB when it reads on a meter on a digital console or a DAW. That's where you want to set this, and then set it and forget about it. Don't try and use this as a volume thing. Think about it as a preamp, and then turn your volume up on stage with your FRs. That's what you want to do. So another thing you're going to want to do is you want to make sure that you're set for plus 4 dB output instead of minus 10 for most recording systems. Everybody's got different stuff. So you go to Setup, and then there are these menus here, and you can click this value knob. You go to Input, Output, and then you can pick different sources here. I'm navigating down right now, and I leave these things. I pretty much don't fool with them. If you're running mono speakers, you can turn this to sum left plus right. If you're just going to run 1 speaker with your stuff, if you're running in stereo out of 2 speakers, leave it on stereo. But here's that setting I was talking about, output level. This will go from minus 10 dBV to plus 4 dBu. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but that is really, if you're using professional grade equipment, going to PAs, if somehow the signal is not loud and you've got this turned all the way up, that's what the problem is. You want the signal coming out of here to be pretty hot, but not so much that it's clipping. So you put it on plus 4 dB, and then you use this knob here on out 1, and you've also got the same thing on out 2 to then adjust to whatever your playback system is. So that's a really important setting. You can go down here and also do it your output 2 in mono or stereo. So those are things you're going to want to do. And again, this is in the input output section. All right. Another thing you're going to want to look at is in MIDI remote. That's the next one. And, I don't fool with most of this stuff. Scene revert, something you might want to play with. Go read the manual about that. But here is really important. If you've got a wah-wah pedal, this is going to default to 0. And if you've got a wah-wah pedal set up for external control 1, which we're going to show, and you've got it spring-loaded so it's cocked back, then the wah is going to be on in every preset, and you'll be hacked off when you first find that out. But all you got to do is go in here to external control 1 and turn that to 100%, and so it's going to read the controller with the toe down even though your spring wah is back, right? It's going to read it like it's toe down when it starts up. So this is really useful. I go ahead and set both external 1 and controller 2 down to their maximum rather than 0. So when the preset loads, it thinks the external control is on its maximum. This is the place that you can adjust that. So that's pretty cool and pretty useful. think let's go back into MIDI remote and let's go over a couple of these pages. Let's see, channel external, there you go. So you go to the external page, and this is where you set up what you want external 1 and 2 to be. So this is really important. So it'll show up as none originally, and you just twist the knob and say, I want pedal 1 to be external control 1, and I want pedal 2 to be external control 2. And that's it. And now you're set up. Your wah-wah is going to work. Whenever you set up something to control don't pick pedal, pick external control 1 and 2. And that's useful because you can fix things globally and not have to go in preset by preset to change things. That's the beautiful part of this function. So I highly encourage you to do that. Let's see what else might be worth looking at. Global settings, enter. If you're, most of us are going to use the power amp modeling on. If you are just trying to run a power amp and a cabinet, a real one, and sometimes this will sound better off than on, but you should be leaving that on. The cabinet modeling, again, if you're running through a real cab on your own and you're not trying to use flat frequency response monitors, you probably want to turn that off, or otherwise you're going to get a cab through a cab sound. This is another place that's kind of cool for your effects spillovers. If you want, when you change a preset for the reverb and tail to continue, you can come here and you can change that so that both of them will spill over to the next preset. This is just a place you can do that so it doesn't immediately like chop off when you're changing presets. Another thing that's really cool in the global EQ that can be really useful, and you can do this through the software too, through the editor, is there are on the out 1 there's an EQ, and on out 2 there's also an EQ. That's really good for optimizing your system for flat frequency, flat response monitors that may have a hump in them to make them sound more cab-like or not enough high end or whatever. This is a little place where you can go and you can pull out things. For example, there's not a lot of guitar down at 31K, and I tend to pull almost all of that out sometimes. This is a place to do it if you're getting too much bottom end in your speakers. But there are little adjustments you can do here. And again, what's nice about this is that it's global. It's coming at the output, so it doesn't affect the presets, but it'll change everything to optimize it for your cab. So it's something you can go to tune in if you feel like the presets are coming in a little boomy or not bright enough or need a little more mids. And just do a little boost. Sometimes literally putting like a 0.1 or a 0.2 at 500K will wake your FR up if it's kind of like not giving you the mids you want, because guitars are nice mid instruments. So those are some things I think you should look at. I'm not going to go into all the foot controller stuff here. There's plenty of that on the web. I do like the OMG setup where you combine this with an FC6. I do have that on my own that I really like, and Matt Picone came up with that from Fractal, and there's some ways to customize that. You get 3 banks. Like I said, originally you're just going to get the first 2. You're going to get the third one in a couple of weeks. Don't know exactly when yet. I will email everybody when it's ready. So, and I'll also put it on the Fractal Forum. But let's talk about the banks right now. The bank number 1 in live gold are the Marshall style amps. And you can see that I've got Marshall preamps, which sound amazing. Marshall amps, Friedman style amps, the Splon style amps, Camerons, Soldanos, Bogners. The Hook amps, which are great. All these are great amps, actually. And a couple of miscellaneous amps. That's sort of bank 1. We're going to walk through some of those in a minute. And then bank 2 is, and you get these empty presets at the beginning, 10 of them for you to use for yourself, just like the Dream Rigs. So you've got workspace in each bank. You're not giving that up in case you want to assemble your own favorite types of presets. But Bank 2 has Fender amps, it has Vox amps, and some vintage amps like the Supro or the High Watt style, an Ampeg, a JC120, and then these Class A amps, you know, that are similar to Vox's, Morgan amps, Matchless and Samson, divided by 13. Then there's some Dr. Z amps, Ruby amps, and some other boutique amps like the Swart and the Rambler. I put the Orange in the other boutique. Technically, they're not boutique, I know, but that's just where they fit best. We've got the Trainwrecks, the Sewers, Carol Ann's, custom audio electronics, some Dumble style amps, Bluetooth, 2-rock, Fuchs. And that's what you get in Bank 2. And Bank 3 is going to be, and it's in progress, but again, you don't have it yet. Diesels, Ingalls, the Van Halen 5150s, the Mesa Boogies, some other modern amps like Cornfords and the Legacies, the Fractal amps. And then I'm going to probably do some miscellaneous. This may change, but there'll be some single coil only presets and things like that. So that's what's contained in there. So let's go to a preset layout now. And again, these are for your own use. And I highlight these in blue so you can see these dividers. When you go to one of these, they're going to be blank, okay? They're just dividers so you can find presets easily. So this is the basic preset layout, and I'm going to walk you through it. And this is by design. And I did this because by doing this layout this way in an FM3, it gives a lot of flexibility, but it also can be used in the AXFX3. You can take an FM3, lay it out there, and when you import it in the AXFX3, it will still work. So we have an in, and you have to have an in to have a signal, and the in has noise gate in it. And I have set up 3 different noise gates that will vary. They'll change as we go from scene to scene, as you'll see, depending on how loud the amp is getting, to try and keep your hum to a minimum. So every amp's going to have these scenes here at the bottom. The names may change, but basically, you know, for most amps, you'll have a scene 1 will be clean, 2 will be a low or a low gain, lower, and then scene 3 will be a rhythm, a medium gain, and then scene 4 will be a high gain or a lead sound. Now, notice there are these asterisks down here where it says these things: clean, low, medium, rhythm, etc. All that means is use your single coil guitars on those instead of up here. And the reason for that is humbuckers hit an amp harder than single coils do. And so when you go from scene 1 to scene 5, what's going to happen is this filter block is going to come on with a boost that's going to lift your preset. And we'll talk about a little bit your signal going into the amp. And that kind of compensates for that, so it doesn't get weak sounding when you go to a single coil. There are a couple other ways to do that too, and I'm going to walk through those. Again, there's a lot of data in this video. But this was by design, so you Telecaster players out there, Strat players, you know, a lot of these amps, they may not be single coil friendly, but a lot of them are if you do the right thing and you put a boost in front of it. So these kind of do double duty in that regard. So what I've done is tried to leave some space here for blocks that you might want to use in designing these things. And I'm always watching the CPU up here. I tried to leave you some CPU so you could put your own drive block in here, other effects, but you know, you want to keep this under 80%. And I did the very best I could to give you some room to play with to make these presets your own. So on an FM3, you start with an in, and then there's going to be a send at the end of this chain, and there's going to be a return. That will actually send the signal, if you want, out of your unit into another, like an H9 Eventide or something, and bring it back. And I actually have the output level up just a little bit on it, just 1 dB. You can always come in full with that on any preset, but I did that for all of them by design. It just sounded a little better to me. I don't know why, but it just did. And then you've got an out 1 and an out 2. And again, I haven't changed anything on these out 1s and 2s, but you've got these mixers, but you've also got scene levels, and this can be really important for you later, where you can adjust a scene a little bit down. You can't go up very much because of headroom, and we'll talk about that. So what's this hanging thing here, right, coming off the amp? Well, I put that there because some of you, not many of you hopefully, but some of you aren't using flat frequency, FR, flat frequency fret response monitors. You may be using a real power amp and a real speaker cab, and that's going to color your sound maybe differently than what I intended here, because you're using a real cab. But this, like the Naked Amps does, lets you tap, and I think the Dream Rigs did too, lets you tap off the amp and go out to that. So if you find presets that you want to do that on, you will probably want to take this amp tap, and you will probably want to break this by clicking on it, and you might want to add a GEQ here, and then run this like this, and use your out 2 to go to your power amp. So this could go to front of house, for example, with the cab sound, and that can go to stage. So you've got the ability to do that. The other reason I did that is for the AX3 versions. That's exactly what will happen in the AX3, is that this will come down, but there'll be a GEQ right here I'm clearing this out. And then there'll be an output 3 right here, and there'll be an output 4 connected up here. So that is what will happen there. So you can use them on that way as well. You can take advantage of the more outputs on the AXFX3. So I want you to be aware of that. And again, there's space in here for you to do things. So this is the basic preset layout. Some of them are going to have different things in it, but almost every preset's going to have a wah. All right, and there are 4 different wahs available to you. There's a Clyde, there's a Vox, there's a Crybaby, there's another Vox. In the metal amps, this will be the Mortal wah, which sounds a little better with the higher gain amps. And that is going to be assigned to external 1, medium position, and the value is toe off, meaning that just like a real wah-wah pedal, you would click it all the way down. If you hold it there for a little bit, it'll turn the wah off. So you may have to come in here, if that's the case, on a preset and just change your off value to 0 if you want to do it that way. That's another different way to do it. So for you wah guys, you have to figure out what works best for you. I went with the majority of folks, and this is the way I set it up. The next thing is I use drive 2. This is really important for the main overdrives. I don't use drive 1. There are some drive 1s in here, and they're usually fuzzes. And there are only just a few presets that have that. That's because you should make your own drive 1. Drive blocks are very personal, and figure out what you like best. You can replace this one with it if you want, but this one is built in and it comes on in certain presets. And it'll vary a little bit, but usually in most of them in slot A, there's a micro boost that's set to just a little bit of gain, and there's also just a little bit of top end shaved off because strats can be kind of bright. So instead of using the filter, you could use scenes 1 through 4 that are normally humbuckers, but you can just hit this drive on with a Strat or a Tele and it's going to sound good. Okay, and this will shave a little bit of that top high end. Of course, you've always got that tone knob on your single coil guitars too to help with that. So that's something. And then this next one, B, is in almost every preset. And this is the emulation using an FET boost of a Klon Centaur. I have a real one. I've gone back and forth and I beat them. This is a very close setting to that does basically sort of a clean boost. These are not the exact settings I use. I adjusted it for this particular preset. Usually I have the tone a little down. But basically you've got a Klon now, which is nice because they're like $2,000 pedals now. Great pedals, by the way. Then C will vary. It can be a Tube Screamer. Right here it's a King of Tone. And then D will also vary. It could be a Timmy. In this particular one, Bender fuzzes are specific to Voxes and those kind of things. So I've got a Bender fuzz in here. So usually A and B are going to be pretty consistent. On the metal amps, A will probably be the Tube Screamer because they're used pretty extensively to kind of cut the fat going into the amp, so it's not too flubby. A little bit about the drive pedal. All right, so I told you about the filter pedal, the filter block before the amp. In scenes, and there's this great function here, by the way. There's a couple little things you should know about. If you see this number 10, if you click that, you'll see what would show up at a screen on like your FM3 bottom row right here or on an FC6. If you do that, it'll show you, but it's darked out is what won't show up. And again, every preset that's made for the FM3, I put FM3 at the end of it, so you know. But you've got these other things here that are very cool. Here's the scene manager, and this will tell you the list of the scenes, just like clicking in this will, if you take that off, right? They're all down here. For example, the noise gate on this one starts in A, but when it goes to scene 2, it'll switch to B, which is a little bit higher noise gate. And then scene the middle, the rhythm thing, it'll stay on B. And then for the lead in this particular one, it goes to C. Some people may not like that. They may want to turn it all the way off. I went ahead and put it as C because those tend to be higher gain and noisier, but you can figure out what you want to do there. But this scene manager is a super cool function. I used it a lot. It helped a lot in making this. You can bypass things, etc. So let's look at this filter now. So I'm going to call up the filters. You can see what I'm doing. And notice the filter is bypassed always on scenes 1 through 4 usually. And in this particular case, it's bypassed and it's set to the value of B. But as I was telling you about single coils earlier, on scenes 5, 6, and 7, which are and 8, those are usually for single coil guitars. They can also be for humbuckers, though. They can just be an extra boost that you're putting into the amp. So don't ignore that. If you want to get a little bit over the cliff, you know, there are no rules, right? But if we go to scene 5, you'll notice that the filter comes on. And let's go look at it. and it's a 5.1 dB boost. And I also cut a little bit of lows off of it sometimes going into the amp, because it can make the amp flubby. You can fix that if you want to leave it neutral. But if you go to just scene 1, notice it goes to 3.5. So that's not a bad boost just for humbuckers as well, or single coils. So you've got these 2 different levels of boost right in front of the amp at your fingertips if you set up a floor thing between filter A and filter B anytime you want on any preset. So that's pretty useful, but that's just one of the boost things that we're going to get. That's not the main one. And then sometimes in some amps, like maybe a Friedman or some others in C, this one has a bigger boost, but there may be an actual PEQ or a dip or an add if the amp has that. And maybe I'll find a Friedman later to show you that. And then I did a -3 one as well, in case you want to bring the signal down, maybe for a rhythm part or something. You could go to D, and it'll cut the signal going into the amp some. So you have some options here with the filter boost. So pretty cool. All right, I'm going to skip the amp and the cab real quick, just do the delay and the reverb. And then we're going to go to those because we have to do a real heavy push on those so you can see what's going on in those. The delays are going to vary based on what kind of amp it is. They're not always going to be the same. For example, here, I've got kind of vintage digital, and I usually set this to a tap delay, and I usually do a quarter note in one, and I do a dotted eighth note in the second one for the same type. And you can play with the mix. It'll vary by amp. But some of these will be different. There'll be memory mans, there'll be tape echoes for maybe the older Fender style amps. So there are a lot of different echoes, and you can build your own, but there are some nice pre-made echoes in here that you can play with. Delays, they're not too wet. If you like them really wet, you can do that. But again, these are designed to be live use presets. And if you add a lot of delay, you wash your sound out on stage. Those of you who've done this know what I'm talking about. So this is just sort of the hint of delay stuff. And last, there's a reverb block. It usually defaults to my favorite reverb, which is what I call the tiny hint of reverb. That's on economy, so you're saving CPU. The Sun Plate, and it's literally only 2%. And while you're playing, you won't hear it. When you stop, you'll hear just a little bit of wash. I like just having a little bit of space around it. You can turn it off if you want. No problem. It's very, 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 very subtle. It was like that in the Dream Rigs as well. B is, in this particular one, it says large tiled room because I'm trying to get that sound, but usually on things like the Fenders, that's your spring reverb, either large or medium, will be in channel B. Channel C is usually this great London plate for some of those classic sounds. It makes sense that the AC Vox would default to that. And again, you need to fix the mix the way you like it. And then D is one of my favorite reverbs, the large plate. This is sort of an emulation of an EMT 140 plate reverb, a very famous one that was used on things like Led Zeppelin records and a lot of others. It's a bigger sound, but it kind of stays out of your way too if you do it right. So you've got those available, and I may switch up a couple of reverbs here and there based on whatever I'm doing in a preset. So that's kind of just walking through the basic effects. Let's take a little bit of a tour now of the amp and the cab block because there's a lot of cool stuff going on in there. We'll go to the cab first. Okay, let's talk about the amp and the cab blocks because that's where the heart of everything is here in the Live Gold. I want to go to the cab block first. A lot of people overlook the cab block. They think the sound's in the amp. Half the sound is in the cab. Think about the cab as being like 1,000-point, very discrete EQ plot of what's going to get through. It's a filter. What frequencies are going to get through it, coming out of the speaker, and what ones are not going to make it through it. And so cab IRs are absolutely critical to getting a great sound. No question about it. Now, the FM3 lets you blend 2 different cab IRs together if you want to, which is cool. And the AXFX3 lets you do as many as 4. I will tell you through trial and error, I really, really try and just use 1 cab IR whenever I can get away with it that sounds good. It just seems to snap and click better than when you're trying to mix 2 in this. It still works, and I do that on a few things because I need it to get where I'm wanting. I'm blending 2 mics or whatever. I think I've used a lot of the factory. This is all factory presets. There are no custom IRs in this. Thank God we've got 2,000 plus IRs, which is great. And so I'm really pleased with this. And I spent a lot of time, this is what a lot of what you're paying for, is a lot of time trying to find the best IRs. They weren't the usual suspect IRs. In this case, it is the usual suspect. It's a 1x12 classic 15 watt blue mix. And then I try and set things up to get a good tonal balance out of the speaker that's literally 10 to 12 feet away from me. And that's important because you won't necessarily hear the bass if you're really up close to it, but when you're far enough away from a speaker, a good bass wave sometimes needs 12, 15, 16 feet to really kind of form. And so getting the bass right to make it sound like a real amp in a room is really important. So I tend to do low cuts that can go anywhere from 50 to 100 depending on what the gain of the amp is, and you will see these things will move as I go through scenes. And sometimes on a AC chimey amp, I'll leave this high cut all the way open because I like the chime on top. But there are other amps where I'll cut it at 10,000 because there isn't a lot of frequency content maybe that's up there. So it'll vary. So let me just show you real quick. I'm going to click through the scenes and I want you to watch down here and let's see what happens. So there's that one. Okay, it stayed about the same. I got a 12 dB slope. Now it went up here because my gain's going up and I'm trying to cut off some of that bottom end because if you feed too much bottom end coming in or out of it, it gets woofy when you add more gain to it. And the slopes here, I usually use a 12 drop off, but I'll go to an 18 or even a 24 if an amp's got if there's a lot of bass content in the IR. And I'll usually use a 6 slope for the high end because I like that, but sometimes a 12 will work. So I got a scene 4 here, and okay, it looked like it went back a little bit because I was on a lead sound. I probably wanted to add a little bit of that back in, but it'll vary. I wanted you to understand that. And I don't use the preamp stuff a lot except for this low and high cut. This is in addition to what you're doing at the IR level, and this also will change a lot. The reason that thing could go down low is because look, I'm at 143 here. When I go backwards, 123 low cut now on the rhythm, right? Around 120, right? And then for low 112, and then all of a sudden probably back down to 100. So you're going to see that move based on what the amp's doing. And that really helps focus the sound so that you don't kind of have too much mush as you get more gain. And that's a principle you're going to see consistent in this and then in some other ways as well sometimes. So let's look at the amp. There's an authentic tab, which is really cool now, where you can just look at exactly at the amp's controls and you can dial things in from there. And I really do like to use that. There are some amps that are the tone stacks bypassed, and this is all you need to see. So you need to look at it. The other stuff doesn't work. But ideal is where you do most of the work. And then so I'll have, like I said, a clean, and it'll be low input and then high level to compensate because there's not a lot of gain, and try and focus it. But then we've got these little dots down here. And if you're a Naked Amps customer, 1400, you recognize this. These are assigned to control switches. So you can use foot switches to control them. And the most important one to get the most out of this TonePack is this input boost. It's assigned to control switch 2. The input boost will add a boost to the front of the amp in addition to all that filter stuff we talked about. And you can control under this preamp tab how much of a boost it adds and what kind of a boost. And I almost always use neutral because I'm trying to go for organic amp sounds. I don't try and color it more here, but there are literally some drive types you can experiment with. And this normally defaults to 12, which frankly is too much for a lot of amps because if there's bass in it, it'll just go really flubby. So what I've done is you change scenes. Notice, some of these will stay at a certain level, but some of them will move up. That one actually moved down a little bit, interestingly enough, because I was doing drives, I think, with it. It was getting flubbier. Some of them will go up. So I've custom designed what the boost levels are for each one of the scenes. And for some amps like the Marshalls, which we can go look at, man, it is absolutely essential that you use this boost. They wake up. It's really critical. If you don't set up a Footswitch to use it, the problem a lot of people get when they get in this is they get in and they see this and they try and click it on and it doesn't click on because it's set to a control switch. You have to click a control switch. If you don't have a foot switch you want to use it for and you want to do this, you just got to come in here and turn it off, and then you can change it and it'll be on or off whatever you set it for. But right now it's going to look at a control switch. And control switch 2 is always assigned to the input boost. On my FC controllers here, I have set up a layout on my FM3, layout 7, where I can go to layout 7 and I can boost the amp or cut the amp. Right there, turn it on or off. And then I can also, if I hold it, cut the bass. Next to that is a fat switch that I can turn on or off. And if I hold it, I can reverse the bright switch on an amp, which is sometimes good if maybe the amp is bright and you want to use single coils. If you reverse the bright switch, it might sound great now. And then there's also saturation switch, and you can, takes me back to my main layout. So this is a page that will probably be included if it's not in your original download. It's coming. We want to try and do some OMG 9 layouts and things like that. But this is layout, fits in number 7. And the way you do that is you go to layouts, and you go click, and you go and you be on 7, which should be blank on yours, and you click this, and you go import layout, and you'll find that file, and it will overwrite it. You know, you go to that space wherever it is in your download file, and then you click it and you download it, and it'll remember it. It'll save it there, and then you'll see this. Now, I haven't done these over here for the views. I've just done these 3, but that's just a way to do that. I know it's confusing. Go read the manual. Sorry. All right. So the cab there. I also in the cab I don't touch any of this stuff except I will add a little bit of air, just a tiny bit. And that just adds a little presence in the room. That's all it is. It's just a hair. It's not much, but I do hear it. It's very subtle, but it's there. Last is if you have more than one IR, you'll find that I've aligned them. So this one, again, is muted. I didn't use it. But if you want to try out other IRs, one thing you can do on a scene is mute the existing one, unmute this one, and then go out and point to the IRs that you want to check out and see how they sound. You know, set all this stuff up. I encourage you to do that because you had to use the factory IRs, and there's some great ones in here. I think it sounds good, but I do think even these presets can sound even better with, you know, a really great IR that works specifically with your specific FR system or whatever you're using. Let's go back to the amps now. Cut now is control switch 5. It's not 2, 3, 4, 5. It actually goes 2, 5, 3, 4, 6. And cut. Also, that's what matches it in the, I believe, in the naked amps. The 2 is the same as in the naked amps. The 3 and the CS4 are all the same as in the naked amps. And then I've added the cut and the saturation switch. So the cut's really good, and it's on the same foot switch I set it up under, as I showed you a minute ago, under boost. That way, if you boost it and it's really boomy, you can hold that switch, and it'll put the bass cut in action, and it might help with that, tame that. Fat switch, not every amp has one. Some that do are built into the channel itself. It'll say, you know, Vibro King Fat or whatever, but there is a fat switch and you can try it. It's sometimes good if you've got a single coil that's not working with it regularly. Hit the fat switch and try the single coil. The Friedmans are fat switches. In fact, I did presets with the fat switches on. Are really good for that. And then the bright switch is on reverse. Now, what does that mean? That means is the amp is going to default to whether it has a bright switch on or not. So all that means is whatever the amp is, it will reverse it. So in other words, the Vox AC13 has a fixed amp bright switch. That's great. I think an Atomica amp, Eddie Van Halen amp, and let's go there. It's a pretty cool amp, actually. We'll go to the Atomica Brown Sound amp. And that bright switch is off. And you probably won't like it when you turn it on because it's probably going to be really, really bright, but the amp defaults to be off that way. So what's nice about the bright switch is that, again, if you've got single coils and you're playing Fenders to have bright switches on them, you have the ability with the foot switch to turn it off and see if you like that better, if it's a little too bright for you. On this Atomica, the saturation switch is on, so there is no foot switchable thing because that is how the amp comes. The Camerons are like that too. But if we go to, say, this beautiful treble 1959 Come to Town Jimmy Page, I have got the saturation switch, and that's like a different kind of boost in a way. It saturates the preamp tube section. And you set the volume of it with the saturation drive. The default is 4, which is too high for most. So I've dialed it in based on the amp. I found a level that I think is good. And it'll do something very similar to what the boost does in terms of lifting the volume, but where the boost kind of makes things more organic sounding and accentuates them, saturation kind of smears the sound a little bit, which again is a cool effect. Eddie Van Halen had a lot of that saturation thing going on. So you've got two options here in your amp thing to kind of change the sound that you have. So just to review, you've got the amps 4 scenes. You've got the ability to boost those 3.5 with the filter. You've got the ability to boost those 5.1 with the filter. You've got a built-in variable amp boost that will change based on whatever amp it is. Here it's 8 dB hitting an amp harder, and it'll vary sometimes by scene. And then you've got the drive blocks. So you kind of want to be careful because we know that in scenes 5 through 8, the filter's always on, right? So if you try and do an amp boost with the filter on and a drive block, you may actually digitally clip. That's just the breaks, dudes. So try the boosts basically on scenes 1 through 4 and see how they work for you there, including with single coils. And kind of reserve scenes 5 through 8 if you've got single coils to using just the filter to see how that sounds. It's just a tip. I want to talk a little bit about setups because I really think this is a huge part of how to get the most out of this. You know, having a really good FR is going to really help these sound as good as they can be. Now, I use an Atomic Neo CLR, and I know not everybody has those. I really like them. You can go see Pete Thorne's video on those on the Atomic CLR website. For a lot of reasons, they disperse very widely. So it's not like a bunch of them where if you move 3 feet over, all of a sudden you've lost your high end. You go, where did my sound go? You can actually kind of move around the stage a little bit with them. They're loud. They cut off everything at 70 and under, and they have a switch where you can cut off at 120. So if your stuff gets really boomy, you can cut those off. But you may have something different. And a lot of FRs on the market are very good. I've got a Gemini Mission back here I like that I'm experimenting with. But some of them are very boomy. They kind of hype the cab thing. So you're going to have to adjust for that on your end with your stuff. Also, your guitars, the way you play, that last mile is always in your fingers, your guitars, your pickups, your playback systems. And so these presets are going to get you hopefully right on the money, but if not, they should be pretty close. And you can make your own little adjustments to make it sound the way you love it. That's what matters. It's got to be something that works for you, that inspires you to play. But don't neglect things like, you know, turning your volume up and down on your guitar or turning your tone control down a little bit. I like to roll a little bit off on my... There's some things to know. And the first thing is that if you ever use the XLR signal, when I use mine, I have my FM3 dimed. It's all the way up, out 1. You may not need to do that, and it might be too loud for yours, and here's why. Different FRs respond differently on inputs. For me, this works. I know it's going to hit the amp at about minus 12 dB because I've got a meter up here on my universal audio console above my in front of me, and I can see where everything's hitting. That's how I level presets. But I will also tell you that the SPDIF output, the digital output in this, is 1.5 dB louder than the XLR output. So you have to be careful of that. I don't know about the USB. I'm assuming the USB and the SPDIF are the same. I never use the USB for recording. I just use the USB for MIDI. I just don't. I just like to run everything into the console and go from there. But that is important for you to know because you want this to be hitting about minus 12 on average on a meter. You want to have some headroom so that when you add boosts and stack gains, it goes up and it doesn't start to distort or clip. So for you, you'll probably run your output 1 knob somewhere from between noon and 3 o'clock. Probably not more than 3 o'clock is my guess. And then get the rest of the volume from the amp that you're using. Again, I dime mine, but that's the way I have mine set up. But just know you can do that. But try and think about the FM3 as a preamp that you set and forget, and then when you want it to get louder, you go to your actual speaker and you turn up the volume there, and that's where you're going to get your volume and power. You just want to optimize how loud your FM3 is coming into that speaker. I hope that all makes sense. I did a leveling video a long time ago that's probably a little outdated, but it kind of explains these concepts. The other thing is that the audio, there's an audio input-output page under settings for input-output audio, and it should be on +4. Some of you might have Scarlett Focusrite preamp that you're using. Those XLRs will add gain automatically, and therefore it'll be too loud and distort. You have to use the TSRNs on those unfortunately, to get around that, because you can't dial the gain out. There's some other probably ones that are like that. But that's a place where you can play with it. -10 tends to be too low. +4 is what pro systems use, and then kind of adjust everything from there. You want to make sure that pedal 1 is set to external 1, and you can use pedal 2 and set to external 2. There is a way, you can go to the manual, again that's not the purpose of these videos, to, at least there was on the AX3, I think there is in the FM3, where you can set up a pedal 2, let's say, to control the amp, the volume going into the amp, just like a volume pedal in front of an amp, or the volume at the end of your chain after everything, so everything kind of stays the same. You're not affecting the gain. I think the numbers are 10 and 11, if I recall right, that you set the pedal to that, and then you're done. And then you don't have to have a volume block and use that processing in your preset. So this is one of the guitars I use. It's a Gibson. Technically it's a Les Paul. It's a 61 reissue. The first year they made SGs. So I use that on almost everything. I've also used the Dweezil Zappa version of that guitar, which is a little thicker pickups. This one is pretty great. Thank you, Dweezil. And then for Strat sounds, I decided I'd use a white Sur Strat, because it's more like what you guys would use. I have a couple other Strats I really like, but this is just got a great sound to it. Great. So when I dialed the Strat presets in, this is what I used. And then I also will use my old trusty Telly, which is arguably the best sounding guitar I have. So for any of that kind of stuff on the old Fender amps and whatnot, it's got Lawler pickups in it. It's a real 68 neck. It does what a Telly's supposed to do. It just sounds great. So those are the guitars I used. In this, Mark Holcomb used his PRS. When I do the metal banks, I may use this David Grissom, who is a great guy and friend and a great player. I might use his. I know it's not technically a metal guitar, but I know a lot of guys like this, and the pickups are a little darker, which I know David likes. It's a great guitar, so I may use that on the Bank 3. It's not been done yet, but it's coming. But I tend to gravitate towards just the regular humbuckers. They're probably a little more like PAFs than heavy duty. It's just what I like, because I like to have a wide variety of sound.